Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. The Podstash is available on YouTube, SoundCloud, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Let us know where you want to listen, and we'll release there as well.
If you want to help us improve the podcast, check out our shops at blackmarketmemes.threadless.com and dankpodstash.threadless.com. Links will be provided. Anything you buy helps us make the Podstash better. Business owners and creators, advertise on the Dank Podstash. Reach a larger audience, make more sales. Email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com for details.
Washington State listeners, please check out Washington State Anarchists and Libertarians Facebook group. Help us expand the Agora face to face. This is episode 23 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. My name is Nick, and I'm here as usual with my co-host David. How's it going, man?
It's going excellent. We're here with Nick Klein, the mass murderer of the cute and fluffy. He's with Hostile Hare, and he's here to talk about, well, why don't I let him say what he's here to talk about. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing good. I'm not real sure what I'm here to talk about. I was just roped it. No, just kidding, guys. I'm here to talk about all things rabbits and homesteading related, or maybe just things that pertain to us that are less than friendly with the state.
Nice.
Does that work?
Absolutely.
It works.
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of interest in what you're doing and, you know, homesteading on a small scale and all that. So this should definitely be fun. Tell us about Hostile Hare.
All right. Well, Hostile Hare, I turned it into a business back in 2011. But a little bit of the backstory, I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin, and so farming's kind of in my blood. But I'm also a massive pyro. And so I learned as I grew older that it's not cool to be a 30-year-old pyro. So you need an excuse to light stuff on fire. And so I got into alternative fuels.
Nice.
So I was playing around with something called gasification, where you extract hydrocarbons from biomass and run it in a conventional, slightly modified internal combustion engine. You can pretty much any old carburetor engine out there, you can replace the carburetor that uses gasoline with a naturally aspirated producer gas or syngas you can make through gasification. We can go into that in more detail, but the bottom line was I was looking for a natural way to pelletize biomass so that I could use it for fuel. And living in this little HOA neighborhood, I couldn't, I thought what I could use was animal manure, but I wanted something that would poop out pellets like a goat or a deer or an elk. Well, goats, deer, and elk were kind of off the list because I live in an HOA. So I bought rabbits. And being from Wisconsin, we'd hunt rabbits all the time. I figured if I wanted to, I could breed them for food and eat the rabbits. But I literally bought 5 rabbits just for their poop.
Wow.
My plan was to feed them, debris from the yard, grass clippings and leaves and stuff like that, and then use their manure in the gasifier. And basically the ratio is 11 pounds of rabbit manure will replace a gallon of gasoline in BTU value. So you can literally run a car on rabbit crap.
That's
crazy.
Interesting. That's not where I would have expected the whole idea to come from. That's insanely interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and like any good business, they usually fall into your lap. I thought that I bought 5 female rabbits. Turns out that one of them didn't identify as a girl and wanted to be a boy, and because biologically that's okay. No, in the rabbit world, we say that the sex change fairy showed up, and so one of them grew some dangly parts and bred the other 4 females, and very quickly I had rabbits coming out of my ears. So I started listing them on Craigslist, and people were buying them, and pretty soon I found there was this big market for pet rabbits and breeder rabbits. and started selling them. And then I found some reptile guys that wanted a load of rabbits. So I kept upping my production, and pretty soon I had 50 breeding females, 10 males, and was producing 1,250 pounds of rabbit a month out of my little HOA backyard.
Wow.
And so yeah, I moved my operation to a bigger setup and started producing 3,500 pounds a month, and kind of forgot about the whole gasification thing. Like at that point, I was making more money off of the rabbits. So yeah, it just kind of took off and turned into this monster, and I put it on an LLC and got some tax benefits from it, and started doing it. I'm not quite doing it full time yet, but it's definitely it definitely helps if you've got a tax appetite to run a farm. So that's where Hostile Hare came from.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. That came from that. So
Sorry.
so you're not focused on the gasification like you were saying. You're still tinkering with it.
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, I don't know if a while back there was a show called Doomsday Preppers. Did you guys ever see it or hear of it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
So my first market, when I started, selling to people, I went to a prepper convention. And so that's why it's Hostile Hare instead of Cute and Fluffy Bunny Way or something like that. It was more
Branding.
aggressive. There's all these people that are like Sky Island Rabbitry, Silver Creek Rabbitry. I'm like, oh no, rack the shotgun. It's the Hostile Hare. And it definitely a little bit more in your face. But anyway, I went to this prepper convention, and everybody's interested in food storage. Well, I'm like, hey guys, this is live food storage. You put this in your backyard, and that's the problem with food storage is if it's canned goods on a shelf, you're either going to eat it or it's going to go bad, and then you have empty shelves if you can't replace your food with a grocery store or a farm.
Right.
So rabbits, you can actually store the food for the rabbits and grow more food for the rabbits and then eat the rabbits. So it's a living food storage system.
That's awesome.
Fancy name for rabbit farm.
So you obviously raise them on a larger scale than someone would for like a single family in a prepping situation. It just popped into my head. What kind of food needs would a single family have for keeping rabbits for that purpose, for food purposes, as far as feeding the rabbits?
Okay. Well, the idea is, rabbits are great, but they're not all of the food that you need. But on my website, hostilehare.com, I have this rabbit meat calculator. I'm going to pull it up just so that let's see.
That's pretty cool. You got everything set up on your website to help people figure this stuff out too.
Yeah, because that's the number one question I get is how many rabbits do I need to feed my family?
Right.
And I wish I could say X amount of rabbits, but it takes a little bit more than that. So the idea is you figure out how much meat your family is eating, how much you consume. And if we just want to go with the survivalist outlook on it, you need 75 grams of protein a day to survive. That's just kind of the average. That's what you need to be healthy and okay. In order to get that, you'll need 215 pounds of rabbit because they're 21% protein. I won't get into all the math, but just know that that's the golden number is 215 pounds a year to give you 75 grams of protein a day. So in order to get that, you need to breed one breeding age female 8 times a year, and she'll have on average 8 babies per year. And that'll give you a dressed weight of 215 pounds roughly. That's an average. So my rule of thumb for people that are looking for a survival source of meat is 1 breeding female per member of the household. And you can have more than that and breed it less. And that's how this my calculator is set up. You can breed a rabbit up to 11 times a year. I don't recommend 11 times. I recommend 8 at the max. And then it has up to 20 rabbits in the calculator. So you can say, okay, I can only breed my rabbits 3-4 times a year, and I've got 6 rabbits. So let's say on this calculator, it's 6 rabbits 4 times a year will give you 576 pounds of meat on average per year.
Wow.
So it just does that. And if you if you're raising goats, or another thing that we like is quail here, then you don't need as many rabbits, or you don't need to breed as often. But I mean, if you're thinking about if you're going to be in a survivalist situation, or if that's what you're preparing for, then the more the merrier. You want to be set up so you can raise more, because now you've got rabbit is potentially a currency.
Sure.
You have serious barter power with food. And as much as I love precious metals and investing in gold and silver and stuff to kind of freeze the worth of your assets or of your money, you can't eat gold and silver.
Right.
Exactly.
And you may be able to accumulate a lot of gold and silver if you have food. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. You mentioned about not being able to survive on just rabbit. That's something that has come up in my prepping research as well. It's just because it's not a complete, source of nutrients and whatnot, right?
Yeah, and I should have said it differently. You can't survive on rabbit meat alone,
Right?
Because it doesn't have enough fat. It's got less than 10% fat in it. So if you're in a situation where you don't have enough fat in your diet, you're going to have to get kind of creative. The rabbit does have lipids or fats in other portions of the body that are less palatable, we could say. You got to go zombie. You got to eat the brain.
Oh, wow.
And you can clean out the intestines. And yeah, hopefully nobody's like eating right now, because I love talking about this when there's dinner in front of me. But you can put the intestines and the brain in kind of a soup and put the meat in there with it, and you'll have to drink the broth, and you'll get all of the fats that way, and you can survive.
Sure.
But it's obviously not as enjoyable. Whereas if you're raising rabbits and right alongside of it you've got some quail, now you can eat the quail eggs and get all the fat that you'd ever need, and have the rabbit for all the protein, and eat the quail too for more protein, and you've got a nice almost balanced diet there.
Beautiful. I would imagine the if you're in that situation gardening for feed for your livestock and for yourself, there's some overlap too as far as what you could eat and feed them from the garden as well.
Oh yeah, and that's like I'm like Dr. Brown Thumb in the garden. Like I can't grow anything. And my soil in Arizona just sucks. It's so caustic, It's it's like almost an 8 on the pH scale, and it's actually past 8, I think. Anyway, bottom line is I couldn't grow the hardiest tomatoes ever made in my backyard, so I started looking at aquaponics. And since I'm the rabbit and quail guy, I also, I thought, how can I incorporate rabbits and quail into aquaponics? And I came up with the phrase hare-oponics. And basically, it's just livestock integration. So have you ever heard of the black soldier fly larva?
I have not.
All right, so this little grub is like the coolest thing ever. The adult fly doesn't have a mouth. So as an adult, all it wants to do is reproduce. Sounds a lot like some of your listeners. No, just kidding. So as an adult, it just wants to reproduce, and so it doesn't land on food. It doesn't spread disease, and the babies, the little larvae, eat the freshest food available first. Like they're not like a regular housefly that's trying to eat like the decomp. They want fresh food. I mean, they'll eat decomped food as well, but they will literally eat the cocoons of other flies and limit the housefly population because their little grubs are so ravenous.
Oh, wow.
And they're cool because they know that if they cocoon in the food, then their brothers and sisters are going to eat them. So they do this thing, they go to ground. They try to get out of the food. So if you have a composter that is designed with a ramp on one side. These guys will hit the plastic or the wood and climb out and fall into a harvesting bucket. So you put this composter underneath of your rabbit cages, and all of the poop goes in there, and the black soldier fly larvae is just loving all the rabbit poop. They do this little lemming march of death out of the composter and into a quail feeding trough. So the quail are being fed from the refuse of the rabbits.
Wow.
And then the quail are kind of messy eaters. So about 20% of what they're eating, they drop through the cage, and it feeds the fish that are in a fish tank underneath of the cage. And the fish love those black soldier fly larvae too. Now, there's quail poop and fish poop in the water that needs to be filtered out. So you build a hydroponic system alongside of the fish. So now it's aquaponics. So the fish poop and the quail poop go into the filter that also is your garden. So you've got your fruits and your veggies growing up out of a soilless substrate that can also be fed back to the rabbit. So basically you've got this nutrient loop moving through your aeroponic system, and the only time you're losing nutrition out of it is when you're eating it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I get kind of rambly when I start talking about this stuff, but
that's fine.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm all ears because I really love the idea of aquaponics, and that's just a whole nother level to build on there. That's really awesome. Yeah, this is gonna be...
it definitely it's more of an engineering fun fabrication thing instead of running a hoe through the dirt and planting seeds and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
And it automatically waters your plants, which here in Arizona was probably why the last tomatoes died, because I forgot to water them. And dead. But yeah, aquaponics uses 3% of the of what conventional farming would use. So it's 97% more efficient with the water than conventional farming, because you're not just dumping a bunch of water on the ground. You're actually just recycling it through the same system over and over again, and then you just do water changes as you need them.
Are you what kind of fish are you using? Are you able to eat your fish, or are they more just part of the system?
You can eat the fish. Tilapia are kind of the go-to in aquaponics, but being from Wisconsin, I like bluegill and
Nice.
catfish. So I put those in there, and you got to keep it a little cooler for the bluegills, but it's not horrible if you just put it in the ground. It's fine. Yeah, I had a 2,000-gallon pond that they were happy in it.
Yeah, very awesome. That makes for a good Friday fish fry right there. Some bluegill. Heck yeah! And so you're doing this kind of urban homesteading within an HOA too?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that my HOA is run by the Third Reich and Hitler's little brother. I mean, these guys are grade A assholes, and I mean they'll write you up for if like my truck was one of my tires was 8 inches into the rocks, and my tires are they're wide. And it's just barely touching the landscaping, and they wrote me up and said that if I did it again, they were going to charge me $50. Jeez. It's like, really? I'm parking in my own property. And now, granted, yeah, I signed the CCRs, but that was also this is the house that my ex-wife wanted. So I don't want to be here. I'm just kind of stuck. I'm just trying to make the most of it,
Sure. So it wasn't one of the situations you hear all the time of, I didn't see this stuff in the paperwork. It just kind of was the situation at the time.
Yeah. And that's how they get you, if you're like pretty much 90% of the population, you don't want to read through the whole thing and be like, you can't have chickens here? What?
Right.
But that's what's nice about the rabbits is nobody can see them. Nobody can smell them. Nobody can hear them. They're the incognito livestock. Quail get a little bit chatty, but they sound like a songbird and nobody can really tell what it is. So they just think that there's a bunch of birds in the trees.
Right. And quail are
Would the
semi-prevalent
HOA
in
be
Arizona.
upset?
Sorry, go ahead, David.
Would the HOA be upset to find out about the rabbits and the quail?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
And I've never had a complaint here. And I actually, so my day job, I fix copy machines, and turns out that the HOA office is one of my customers for fixing copiers. And so I went in there and told them, hey, you know, I can make rabbit manure blow up a building if I wanted to. And they're like, oh, where do you live? In one of your communities. So,
Jeez.
yeah, she's like, oh, that escalated quickly. It's like, oh, you have no idea what escalation is. So, oh, but what I was saying earlier, so the Doomsday Preppers show, they had me on there. I was actually on the show.
Oh, cool.
And one of my preps was alternative fuels, and they weren't all that interested in hearing about it running engines and stuff, but they had me weaponize it. So I've got pictures of me with a rabbit shit powered flamethrower.
What?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
What?
Move the fuck over,
need to
Elon
check that
Musk.
out.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
he's pretty cool, but he doesn't, you know, he says that he's green, but he's never powered his flamethrowers with freaking rabbit poop.
Yeah, right? He's not that cool.
I mean, not many people are as cool as me. I'm kind of a big deal. But,
That's awesome.
Ron-
humble too.
You know, I'm
Ron
not
Burgundy
super surprised that they would want you to weaponize rabbit shit instead of using it for a practical purpose on that show. That makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, that's the whole point of the show, was to make fun of preppers. It wasn't like, hey, these are really good ideas you guys can do to, you know, limit the risk to your family starving if there's an event, you know?
Right.
I mean, even when they called me up, they're like, why are you prepping? I said, well, you know, if I lose my job tomorrow, I want to be able to feed my family. They're like, oh, so you're like afraid of an economic collapse? That's a bit of a stretch, but yeah, I could see that. And it was hilarious because the lady's like, well, we'll work with that. I'm like, okay, it's not the truth. And she just like giggled about it.
Wow.
So, but the best part is at the time there was some heat between Putin and Obama, and basically how we spun it was, hey, one bad conversation between Putin and Obama. In fact, Putin threatened to drop the U.S. as a reserve currency because Obama was going to put sanctions on him for some green movement. And if that would have happened, China would have followed suit. And all of a sudden, $18 billion of unbacked currency just floods back into the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And now we're looking at the breadlines of pre-World War II Germany.
Oh, yeah.
And I explained that all in the episodes, like, yeah, these things could happen. It could be, you know, a trucker strike or a gas line breaks. And, you know, in the Phoenix Valley, there's 5 million people, and there's only 4 days worth of food on the shelves in the stores.
Sure.
That goes away very quickly. Anyway, these aren't that outrageous. You know, these are real life scenarios that could happen.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the episode, they're like, oh, well, our economists say that that's not possible. It wouldn't actually happen. And they showed footage of the breadlines of Germany at the time. Like, they showed footage when I was explaining it. I'm like, you realize that you just contradicted yourself.
Sounds like,
and then, you know, here we are.
Sounds like
5 years later.
And Keynesians.
What's that?
Sounds like they're economists or Keynesians.
Yeah, they're like that debt-based stuff.
Right.
But yeah, and then we see what Venezuela's doing. Now, granted, there's a lot of corruption there, but you see exactly what happens when there's a currency problem in a country.
Oh yeah,
they start
even when there's any kind of crisis. I mean, just recently around here, we had it was a big snowstorm. It wasn't that big, I guess, to me, but to everybody else, I mean, food was completely gone off the shelves. Everybody was panicking. I thought it was hilarious, but they didn't.
Yeah. Well, and that's people.
Yeah.
Like, groups of people are a herd and they're dumb, but persons that think for themselves and can help their community, that's where you want to be. You want to be an individual that can actually contribute to the community. You know, it can't just be this massive, oh, I guess we'll go to the FEMA camp because they've got food there. It's you got to figure out how to help the people around you.
For sure.
You know,
you mentioned Venezuela. So how stoked were you when Maduro suggested to his people to start eating rabbit meat? Were you planning on starting up a second arm of Hostile Hare down there in Venezuela, or what?
It's called El Conejo Enojado, the angry bunny. Hostile doesn't translate. It's funny. I probably got sent the meme of socialism starts with, "Hey, how can we make everybody eat for free?" And then, "Hey, how can rabbits save us from this?" It was cool for a while, and then I'm like, look, it's not that far off. I mean, yeah, rabbits. If everybody was raising rabbits in Venezuela, there wouldn't be a problem. But it's a little late for that now.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh man, that's great.
So you're not going to be exporting any rabbits to Venezuela. Well, that sucks.
Yeah, well, they don't have any money to buy them with anyway, so
That's true.
I'm still a capitalist. Heartless capitalist over here.
Yeah, everybody listening is going to be like, geez, people are starving. This guy's like, they ain't got no money for me. Let them starve.
Well, to avoid the heartless capitalist, you had mentioned pre-show when we were talking about bartering for tax avoidance, which strikes a chord in my agorist heart.
Yes, and that's like I think that's people don't realize that the founding fathers. We're gonna go a little bit patriotic here. Play the national anthem in the background. Yeah. So the founding fathers were all farmers. You know, these guys weren't businessmen. They lived in an agorist society, and at the time there was a bunch of different states or colonies that were printing their own currency and stuff, and that got them into a lot of trouble. But for the most part, they were just, they had their markets. They would trade livestock and produce and goods and services, and they didn't have like a currency system. Yeah, there was gold and stuff floating around, but it wasn't like solid. And so that's like, yeah, I'm not exactly real happy with government, but I could see their attempt. I can appreciate the attempt at what they tried. But the bottom line is they didn't see what we've become, and they didn't, there wasn't a plan for that.
Right.
I see it as a failed experiment. So
yeah, I agree. And what's really sad is you look at it, it lasted about 2 years before the money system just went to crap. The Constitution ran for about 2 years before immediately banks were given control.
Sure.
Of course, this is all debatable, but that was like the first, once Congress handed over the power to create money to a central bank, that one failed. And then the next one came up and that one failed. And then it wasn't until 1913 that the Federal Reserve actually, took off and it's working, not for the people, but for the people that started it up. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
no worries.
So let's get back to bartering. The only way that you're going to avoid taxes without, throwing Molotov cocktails and shooting cops and all that violent crap, is to make less money.
Sure.
That sounds kind of sad and not fun, but you figure out what are your major expenses. Housing is a big one. So you're going to need property of some kind. You need to eat, and you probably need to go places. So I actually wrote up a thing called the Pillars of Independence, and it's just food, fuel, and medicine. If you can tackle these things, you're doing pretty good. Well, food and fuel, that's kind of what I'm doing with the rabbits and the rabbit manure running stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of alternative fuels that you can do there. But you're cutting down the cost. You're cutting down your need for currency to go out there and put your credit card in a gas pump. If you can distill your own alcohol, and run your vehicles on alcohol. If you go and you buy sugar in bulk, ferment it for a few days, run it through a homemade still, you're going to be paying about 30 cents a gallon for fuel.
Nice.
So that's just one thing. Grow your own food. My food budget when I'm not farming is like $800 a month. That's going out and eating. That's going and buying some groceries for breakfast and stuff. But that's ridiculous. There's no reason to be spending $800, almost $1,000 a month just to feed my fat ass.
Yeah.
You know,
I feel your pain.
and it's not exactly healthy food either. But you put a little bit of time and effort into your backyard, and now you're growing your food. And I'm not talking about doing the fritzy, real pretty stuff that you see on Facebook where their gardens are costing them $500 a month because they keep it all pretty. And
Sure.
You got to do it right. You got to grab a hold of your redneck instinct sometimes, and it might not be pretty, but it's going to grow you some food.
Right.
But then on top of that, if you have a Schedule F, now talk to your CPAs about this. I'm not telling you what to do. Look at getting a Schedule F for your taxes, and run an LLC or a Schedule F. It's basically like running a sole proprietorship, and all of your farming expenses are written off. So anytime I build, I need tools for the garage or whatever, that's coming off the farm. The feed, all of that stuff is a write-off. It's basically like you didn't make that money. So if you have a day job and a Schedule F, you can do that.
Very cool.
It's really good for people that have a tax appetite. But anyway.
Yeah, that's
a lot of people would say, why not just avoid the taxes, just don't pay them instead of trying to find ways to write them off. But I think it's probably smarter, you protect your own ass and you don't have to pay those taxes when you get money back,
Yeah, and I mean, we can scream from the rooftops that taxation is theft, but you know how robberies work? There's an armed man, a dude with a gun comes and takes your money. That's pretty much what will happen if you don't pay taxes. Armed men will come to take your money or your freedom, So yeah, we don't like paying taxes. We don't think taxes are good, but we still need to survive somehow, and so make the system work against them.
It's important to try and protect oneself. I'm of the mindset, let the armed men with guns come, but I know not other people, or other people are not of that mindset, which I understand.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a point where you might want to make your own anti-personnel mines and line them in the walls of the house and let them come in while you're in your storm cellar and hear the fireworks go off. But I mean, I think that we're too comfortable. America's too comfortable for that to actually happen.
Nail on the head.
And so in order to maintain this comfort that we're in, we got to play by some really stupid rules,
Yeah.
Well, doing it the way you're saying with, what is it, the Schedule F and the LLC and all that in harmony with the black and gray markets, I mean, that's a good path.
Yeah. And, that's okay. Here's a fun story. I've got a guy that bought some rabbit cages from me, and I helped him install them in an apartment in downtown Phoenix, 800 square foot apartment. He dedicated a whole room of it, of his apartment, to the rabbits.
Oh, wow.
We cut a hole in the wall, tapped into the sewer so that he could clean the cages out, and it would just go right into the sewer. And he raises snakes. He's got $30,000 worth of snakes on one side of this room. He's got a sheet that hangs up in the middle, and then he raises, I think it's around 2,500 pounds of rabbit meat a year out of the other side. And surprisingly, his apartment doesn't smell. You'd think with all those animals that it would stink, but he does pretty good. Nice. But this dude, I mean, he's breaking so many rules and laws and everything else, and I just tip my hat to him. Like, you're just awesome. One day when I grow up, I'll be just like you.
That's pretty crazy.
Rule breakers.
Yeah.
So what are you working with? Because you said this is pretty much backyard, right? You're running everything out of backyard. What kind of space are you working with?
Oh, I think it's. I looked up the assessor's office. I've got a 1,550 square foot house on a tenth of an acre, just under a tenth of an acre. So my backyard is like 45 by 25, I think.
Wow.
And yeah, I had a 15 by 8 foot shed that had 25 breeding females in it, and then I had some outside hutches that had another 25 females, and then my bucks were all in kind of a rolling cart. I called it the shaggin' wagon. So yeah, I mean, the backyard, it looks kind of like redneck hell, like the Clampetts got into raising rabbits. But when I built the new place, I built all the cages right. When I first got into this business, I was buying every $20 hutch off of Craigslist, saying, "Oh, I'll throw some screws in it and it'll be fine." But they're all like wooden chew toys for rabbits.
Sure.
Right.
So I started building my own cages. And the people that were coming and buying the rabbits asked me where I got the cages. And they wanted cages from me, and so I turned it into a business there too. So now I build cage systems for rabbits and quail. I'm actually looking to get into supplying aquaponics systems. Right now, I just kind of do the consulting on the aquaponics. But
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that kind of dovetails right into Gabe Edgar's question about what a good start for someone with a small backyard and not much time would be. Sounds like the haroponics that you're working on don't take up much space, and then maybe a couple garden beds for feed and whatnot.
Yeah, basically I don't know, I don't have the math on the other stuff, but for every 36 square feet, that's a 6 foot by 6 foot area, you can raise 6,000 pounds of rabbit a year. So you don't need that much. I mean, the average person only eats 1,200 pounds of food a year, 1,200 to 2,000 pounds of food a year. So you only need like 215 pounds of rabbit per year per person, as we covered before. So like my back porch is a 10 foot by 8 foot deal, and I could raise all the food for me and pretty much everybody on my block in that little space. So to get started, it just depends. If you're wanting a hobby and you just want to breed some and sell some pets, just a breeding trio will be fine. If you want to do like a start to a survivalist rabbit farm, you're going to want 2 bucks of different relation and 3 does all different. And with the line breeding and the line breeding and selective breeding, you should be able to use their offspring for up to 15 years without having to bring in outside rabbits.
Wow.
So I would just do 5 rabbits in 6 cages. That way you've got an empty cage for your grow outs and you're good.
The whole haroponic system too sounds really compact and self-sustaining as well. That seems like a great start, because I know a lot of people, like we were talking about before, like aquaponics for the efficiency, but adding this other layer just seems like a no-brainer, and a small area can sustain that.
Yeah, and with aquaponics, you have to remember though that the more water you have, the easier it is to maintain it. Like a lot of people will turn like an IBC, an international bull container, into an aquaponics system. They end up with like maybe 150 to 200 gallons for the fish, and that's really hard to maintain the right nitrate levels and stuff. Whereas with my 2,000 gallon pond, which was only 10 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot,
Sure.
with that, I could leave it alone for like a week at a time and just check the levels once a week, make sure that the fish were still happy and they weren't dying from nitrate poisoning. But then you also have, the more animals you have depositing nutrition into the aquaponic system, the more filtration you need as well. So you'll need a lot of grow beds, or be doing water changes every day. There's a couple of downsides to doing it, and I don't have all the numbers either. We were figuring each quail would replace 10 fish in nitrate production.
Okay.
Or nitrogen production. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it's the numbers are, I don't have all the numbers, but we were assuming that a quail wastes and contributes more waste than fish at about 10-to-1 ratio.
Do you have info on the aeroponics stuff on the Hostile Hare website or anything?
I do. I actually wrote up, it's livestock integration aeroponics.
Awesome.
If you go to hostilehare.com, you can click on the little hourglass, the little search magnifying glass, and enter in livestock integration or aeroponics. There's actually a couple of them that I've written up.
Awesome.
My blog has like 250 entries, so.
Heck yeah. Well, there you go, Gabe. Check that stuff out.
I've got a question about the breeding.
Of course you do.
Well, that's all I ever think about, It's just
so how does that
rabbits
work?
or anything else. Yeah, where does, no.
The what goes into the what again?
You're killing me. I can't get anything out. But yeah, you said earlier you recommend 8 in a year, but you can go up to 11. I'm guessing that 8 is more in line with like what they would reproduce naturally. Do you know?
Yeah. So in the wild, they're gonna reproduce mostly in the spring and in the fall, because it's harsh in the winters and hot in the summers. And in fact, the only reason I can do 8 times a year is because I keep them in an air-conditioned building, or in the air is cooled. You can either use a swamp cooler or an AC refrigeration. So that's 45 days apart. So every 45 days, the mama's pumping out another litter or kindle. In the wild, they're going to breed, have babies, and about the same day that they have the babies, they're out foraging, they're going to breed again. So that's for people that are controlling the environment of the rabbit. They can breed 11 times a year because the doe is still susceptible to breeding at day 1 or 2 of her new offspring. I don't run it that far, that hard, because it's harder on the does and their numbers start dropping off faster. So 8 times a year is about as hard as we'll breed them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. That's why I asked, was wondering, the additional stress, the undue stress put on the doe. So,
but if you find yourself, if you don't have air conditioning, or you don't have, misters and fans are all I used the first year, and they were fine. They bred all summer long. Hit 120 that year. But you have to control your microclimates. If you've got I've got a big tree that puts out a lot of humidity, it drops the temperature a good 20 degrees in the shade. So my swamp cooler was underneath that tree, drawing all of that cool air into the swamp cooler and dropping it another 15, 20 degrees and putting it into the rabbit shed, the rabbitry. And they were getting really cold air in there. The rabbits that were closest to the inlet of the swamp cooler were actually putting on winter coats.
Oh, wow.
So it was definitely cold enough for them. But yeah, they had big, thick, fluffy coats. They're beautiful rabbits.
So what kind of plants
So yeah, that's
and feed do you grow in your hydroponic system?
for the rabbits. I actually just use a separate hydroponic system. I'll use barley or wheat. You can get red wheat or white wheat, even black oil sunflower seeds. And you put them in trays, and you just water the trays for 7 days, and they go from 1 pound of seed to 7 pounds of feed in a week. So you can get a 55-gallon drum full of barley and leave it in your garage or whatever. Actually, you want to cycle through it, but basically it's reproducible feed for the rabbits. It's called fodder.
Very cool.
So that's what you can feed them, plus all of the parts of the plants that you don't eat, like your technically tomatoes are a nightshade and you're not supposed to give them to rabbits, but I've had rabbits that just chow down on the tomato leaves like no problem, and they're fine. I don't give it to my breeders, but to the grow outs it doesn't matter.
Very cool.
They're gonna die anyways.
Yeah, every part of this just seems so efficient. That's really awesome. Extremely interesting.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm fat and lazy, and I've worked hard to become that way. So I try to make things as efficient as possible. I can get it done fast and get back to the couch where I belong.
Nice.
Well, I know that I'm going to be looking into this and be visiting your website quite a bit here in the future. So,
heck yeah, David, you had
very interesting
a question on our Ask Nick Anything thread there. I think is super important. Needs to be asked.
All right, where is it? What is it?
It was why you got to put me on the spot. It was how do I grow a rabbit plant?
How do I grow a rabbit plant? Okay. Well, that's a great question. So I think I answered that already with a rabbitry, not to be confused with a rabbit tree. So a rabbitry is just where you're actually raising your rabbits. It's funny. There's actually a little meme of this little kid that's envisioning a tree just full of rabbits, and somebody says rabbit. But
awesome.
I have no idea how to grow a rabbit plant. I'm in the process of building a rabbit slaughter plant, but that's a story for another day.
Rabbit genocide.
Yep. I'm going to call it the rabbitoir. You ever heard the term?
Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, you said we could get back into the fuel stuff, which I'm interested in as well, but with the gasification and whatnot. Let's hear it. Let's hear some more on that.
Okay. So where to start? All right, I'll start where I did. When I was young, probably 12, 13, I started playing around with electrolysis, which is, splitting water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen by applying a little bit of current to it. You mix in an electrolyte so that it conducts electricity a little bit better, and you just put positive, negative leads into the water from a battery, and you start making oxygen and hydrogen at the anode and cathode leads, respectively. I think oxygen goes to the negative lead because oxygen is positive, hydrogen is negative. I can't remember. Anyway, and then I'd light it on fire and it would blow up, and it was really awesome. So I played around with that when I got older, and I came across some of what's his name? Something Myers. Stephen Myers, I think it was. Anyway, he had a device that would send a pulse or a frequency through the water that would bend. So water, H2O, it forms what's called a tetrahedral, like basically a four-sided pyramid. And if you can bend that, like it's a really strong structure. So if you can bend that a little bit more flat, it's more susceptible to break with less energy put into it. So what Myers did was he came up with a pulse that would bend the tetrahedral shape so that it would use less electricity to split. And then he was running vehicles on what he dubbed HHO gas. So it's a loosely bound set of hydrogen and oxygen that would go in and run an engine. So a lot of people called him a fraud, and his disciples think he was poisoned when he went to eat at a public restaurant. He died in the parking lot. The conspiracy side of me is like, oh my gosh, they killed him, which is very possible because all of his stuff disappeared. Like the next day it was gone. So it's got my conspiracy senses going off. But anyway, I played around with some of that, and that was kind of my introduction to alternative fuels. But the gasification, I was making gunpowder because that's what you do when you're 15.
Yeah.
And I had straw in a paint can, a new paint can. There's no paint in it, with a hole punched in the lid. And basically you put the straw in the paint can and you put the can in fire. And as it heats up, it releases all of it. Well, I know what it is now, but basically you're making charcoal out of straw. And then you grind the straw up and it's charcoal for gunpowder. You got to mix other things in there, but I don't know if I can say those on the air. But anyway, so out of the hole in the paint can was a little indicator fire. And the instructions are, you wait until the fire drops down to like half an inch or whatever. But I'm looking at that. I'm like, that fire, that's fuel. It's getting fuel from the straw. So I dink around with this setup where I took a worm off of a distillation setup I had, basically a copper tube. And I'm trying to see if it's liquid. For like years I'm playing with this, and I'm too lazy to go online and look up what's going on. I got to figure it out for myself. But all of the hydrocarbons were coming out of the straw, going into this worm or this tube and being condensed and then drawn into an engine. I was running a very small generator off of straw. And then I put wood in there and I did a few other things in it. Anyway, when I showed it to a college professor, he's like, oh, it looks like a very rudimentary external heat source gasification. I was like, no, it doesn't have a name yet. So anyway, it turns out some asshole back in the 1880s came up with gasification, and I just reinvented it. But anyway, so the gasifier, basically, anytime that you light a match, 4 things happen. Dehydration, you know what that is. Combustion, you know what that is. Then reduction and pyrolysis are the 2 that people don't really think about. A lot of people know what they are, they just don't know what the names are. So you've got the match in your hand, you strike it, the heat from that causes 2 things. Dehydration first, the water evaporates or is dispersed. Pyrolysis is the thermal breakdown of matter. So when you break down the match, you see the flame is not on the match, it's above it just a little bit. It's burning the gases. And in turn, the heat from the fire releases more gases from it. So that's your combustion. And then reduction is that hot carbon skeleton of the match is still glowing red, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have carbon that is at 800 degrees or higher, it's going to grab the oxygen off of any molecule that's around it. It's just slurping it off of there. So those are the 4 things: dehydration, pyrolysis, combustion, and reduction. So a gasifier is basically a tube in which you put a bunch of feedstock, whether it's rabbit poop or wood chips or coal or even plastic bottles. It kills me that we have recycling plants, like newspaper, shredded paper, anything you want in the top of this thing that's made up of hydrocarbons. And you light a very small fire in the middle of it. and you feed it just enough oxygen to keep the fire going in there. And that heat causes pyrolysis of all of the biomass above it. You know, it heats that stuff up and it releases the hydrocarbons and releases the releases the H2O, the steam out of it. And all of that is drawn through the tube, basically. You know, so you've got all of the tube loaded up with your biomass, and below the fire that you've set is the reduction layer. This is where the hot carbon is still there and sucking, you know, oxygen off of anything that goes through it. You following me so far? I wish that you could see what I'm seeing. So you basically, you're making a fuel-rich exhaust of a fire. So the vacuum of an engine will draw the air into the gasifier and the fuel out of the gasifier. And what your fuel is all the hydrocarbons, but also when you burn something, you're getting H2O and CO2. That's a clean combustion. You're getting those two things. Well, when H2O and CO2 go through the reduction area, you're getting H2 and CO, both of which are flammable.
Right.
So you draw those into the engine, and that, along with the volatile hydrocarbons, runs an engine. I'm taking it a step further. Instead of just burning it off, all that hydrogen, if you can filter all of the dust and stuff, or all the fly ash out of it, and have kind of a large tower at the exit of your gasifier, all the hydrogen is going to go right up to the top because it's like the lightest thing on Earth. And that hydrogen, there's something called a polymer electric membrane, and it basically allows the hydrogen to touch, the hydrogen H2 will sit against this membrane, and if oxygen goes along the other side of the membrane, it will suck off one of the hydrogens, or even two of them, and when that water is formed, it will release an electron into the plate or into the electrode. So you can actually, in a solid state, you can actually make electricity.
Oh, wow.
Just by letting this happen. Yeah, because the same energy that it takes to break a water molecule, you will produce. Well, you won't produce the energy because energy is conservation of energy. But when that happens, it releases the same amount of power it took to break it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know we covered a lot of stuff in that little spurt of rambling nonsense.
No, that's
so
great.
Yeah, that's you can out of garbage you can make electricity, and it's really not that hard. In fact, I'm wondering why, we've got these big government funded recycling plants, right? And they pay $90 a ton on average for cardboard and for paper products so that they can make a subpar recycled product that doesn't make any money. Just looking at this from a strictly capitalist point of view, it's a horrible idea to recycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And most things you can only recycle a few times.
Exactly. And so they're, all this paper going in. First off, we should legalize hemp so we can replace the trees and paper, but it's a conversation for another day. So all of this paper going into the recycling plant could be going into a gasification center, which would make a product that everybody needs, i.e. electricity, and you could still pay the people that are bringing in the recycled stuff, the shred companies and the cardboard guys that are going around, and you can pay them so that you can produce electricity from it. You could even pay them more than $90 a ton, because at $90 a ton, at $100 a ton, you would basically be replacing gasoline at 15 cents, 20 cents a gallon is how it kind of works out.
Yeah, that's just,
I could run those numbers for you, but it gets really boring.
that's crazy. I wonder what the hang up is there. There's got to be some corruption going on for sure, but that's super
yeah,
awesome.
you just opened the door to that. The EPA says that gasification should not be done on a large scale because it releases particulates. Those particulates are fly ash, which is one of the key components in concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So the exhaust from this setup, first off, it's carbon neutral because the CO2 that's going through it can be recycled back and reused over and over and over until it exits as fly ash, where it can be used for a building material. So you have to step back and look at why would the EPA not want gasification? And it comes back to money. The EPA is 75% funded by the fees it collects from the oil and gas industry.
There it is.
So
Yeah.
it is self-preserving by not letting things destroy its moneymaker.
Imagine that.
Yeah, right? That would never... Corruption in government? What? Come on.
I've never heard of corruption in government or government stifling innovation. That's unheard of.
Yeah, except that every time that there was, like, during both of the world wars, the government's like, hey, we don't have very much fuel, so you guys can run on gasification. Check it out. And they, like, sent out pamphlets and stuff. In Europe, there was buses that ran on it, the government-funded buses that ran on gasification. And then here, this is real fun. Back in, have you heard of the temperance movement?
I have not.
Yes.
Okay. So the temperance movement, these little old ladies, church going folks, that said that any lips that have touched alcohol won't touch mine. And it was like late 1880s, 1890s. And right about that time, Henry Ford came out with a pretty sweet automobile. And he was talking about supplying whiskey stills to everybody that bought a car so that these farmers could run their cars off of the sugar that came out of their plants. You know, they could ferment anything, any corn or wheat or anything, distill it and run their vehicles on it. Well, at that time, the oil field owners, I believe it was the Rockefellers, they saw this as a problem. So they dumped $4 million into the temperance movement and get alcohol banned.
Jeez.
But in the bylaws of it, it literally says if you're found with any alcohol in an 18-gallon container, which was the fuel tank on the Ford vehicles, you were sentenced to like just your life in prison. And even when Prohibition went away, they still had a lot of the bylaws, and to this day you have to mix alcohol with a taxed gasoline in order to denature it. Otherwise you need an alcohol producing stamp. Wow. So I just when I've distilled alcohol, I just put it right into a gas tank. I don't, it's taxed, quote unquote, because there's still a residue in the tank.
Nice. Well, that makes perfect sense.
That's
follow the money, find what's holding us back.
Yep.
Stuff is generally tied back to government controlling things.
Well, and that's what people don't understand is government is this sword that is wielded. It's not good and it's not bad. It is, well, it's bad because the richest, most powerful people in the world swing the sword of government and do what they want with it. That's all that it is. So
yeah, I could see that. That makes sense to me.
Well, we're coming up to our time here. I just want to get this one last question in from Quinn Simmons. Describe how the color purple tastes.
Okay. Well, we've got some real witty people out there.
What if it was purple?
I guess you could say, so this is another side story. I've got a dog that when you smell in between his ears on top of his head, he smells like grape smelling markers.
What the?
I know. And so I look up online, like, why does my dog smell like grapes? Some lady had already asked that. She said, my dog smells purple. I'm like, what the? How does your dog smell purple? I don't understand the cross senses here.
What is happening?
But, so I guess the answer is, I bet the color purple tastes like grape scented markers. I'll say that.
That's a much more competent answer than I expected, and I'm glad we asked that.
It tastes like the grape drink you get in jail.
There you go.
Oh, well, I have not been to jail yet, but I'm sure that was a fun experience.
I do not recommend it.
Yeah.
No, I'm too pretty for jail.
Nice. Well, on that very serious note, where can people find you? Hostile Hare, all that stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go through. I've got hostilehare.com. That's the website. And on YouTube, it's Hostile Hare. And you might see a pattern here, but on Instagram, it's also Hostile Hare. And Facebook, Hostile Hare. Twitter, Hostile Hare. I think I've even got a LinkedIn page and a couple of Japanese sites, but not real active on those. So let's just keep it between Instagram and Facebook.
Nice.
Hostilehare.com.
That makes it super simple. Hostilehare.com, Hostile Hare everywhere. Awesome. Well, that was a hell of an interesting show, guys. Go ahead there.
Well, let's say if you look up Nick Klein rabbits on Google, you'll see all kinds of good stuff.
Nice.
So,
very good.
A bunch of interviews and stuff.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. That was awesome. Hopefully you got some good info out there for prepping and HOA avoidance, all the important stuff. That's great. All right, guys. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks for being here.